Welcome back to Ryan and Brian's Bible Bistro. I'm Ryan.
Hey, and I'm Brian.
And this is the Bible Bistro.
Oh, it's a musical episode.
It is. It's a musical.
Okay.
Well, I'm inspired by this.
Well, because we have Jon Weatherly in the house, and he's the one who's taught us that the Gospel of Luke is actually a musical.
That's right.
Well, the infancy narrative is a musical.
It's an infancy narrative. Yeah,
the infancy narrative is a
musical. You reference
musical.
several musicals in the midst of all that.
Yeah, that's true. And a couple of gangster movies. But we are glad to have Jon Weatherly back with us.
It is always a pleasure to be at the Bistro.
And I guess we're actually back with him.
We are back in
his abode.
In the Weatherly manse.
Yeah.
That's right.
The Weatherly hood.
The Weatherly estate.
Yeah. We've had
Shea Weatherly.
We've had it just like a bistro. We've had coffee, and
we've had coffee in appropriately Christian mugs.
Yes, we've had cookies. This is actually
Christian mugs.
This is actually Colegio Biblico. So anyone who
one of my favorite places.
It is a great place. Great people.
You eat so well when you were there.
And what is it? You can't just say words.
Oh, it's a Bible college in Mexico.
Okay,
right on the border.
Yeah,
they have a facility in Eagle Pass, Texas, and in Piedras Negras, Mexico.
And they train ministers for Mexico and other parts of Latin America. Actually.
And even I think they had a student from Equatorial Guinea.
Sure,
which is where Spanish is the colonial language.
Interesting, I didn't know that.
So. I knew nothing about this before you guys said anything.
Well,
It's a fun place.
I can add nothing here.
If you're invited to go there, go. You will be received
warmly,
and the ladies are going to cook for you like nobody's business.
Yeah, good people there.
All right, well, we've also had cookies.
Yes.
I can talk about cookies.
Those are from my wife.
Fantastic. Yeah.
They are delicious.
If you thank Mrs. Weatherly for that.
Her signature chocolate chip cookies.
The Lady Weatherly, as we like to call her.
Her secret recipe.
Okay.
Which is the Toll House recipe with 50% more chocolate chips.
Oh,
they are very chocolatey.
They're very chocolatey, which I like.
If you want a chocolate chip cookie,
that's it. I mean, it's first of all the name chocolate comes first.
I need a good balance of cookie, and the ratio's got to be right,
which means more chocolate.
That's right.
Well, anyway, what do we bring Jon to talk about today? Why don't you tell us?
This is the fourth time.
Fourth.
You remember the Saturday Night Live? They used to have they had a special lounge for guests that have been there. What was it, over 8 times? The 8 Timers Club or something like that?
It could be. I go to bed on Saturday nights.
Did you in the 70s though? You did.
Heavens no.
That's where he was wearing a white bow tie back in the 70s.
Back in the 70s.
It was like Paul Simon and Steve Martin. I'm trying to remember. It was the people who were on there all the time.
From my era, in fact.
You're our 4 Timers Club now. We'll have to think. I don't know
special lounge.
What we will do. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know what you're saying.
This podcast is getting really
old.
We're on the 3rd season, and Jon's been with us 4 times. Anyway, so Jon, last time you were here, you talked about the Olivet Discourse in Luke. Luke Acts is your specialty. I remember the first time we had you on, you just talked about the Gospel of Luke in general, and it was a great episode. You talked about Acts a little bit then, and we said then we would have you on to talk about kind of the book of Acts and how do we look at it and how should we read it and this kind of thing.
And in proper New Testament prophetic tradition, we didn't know how long it would take to come to the fulfillment of that promise.
Who knew?
That's right.
So, but indeed, as New Testament prophecy, it does come true.
It does indeed. It does indeed. It may not seem like it's soon, but it's soon enough. That's right. Okay, and that's pretty much the whole story, right?
There we are. Okay.
That's the book of Acts in a nutshell.
Okay, soon enough. All right. Well, next week.
All right. Yeah, we've lost all control here.
So we want to talk about the book of Acts.
Yeah, let's tell us everything we need to know.
Everything we need to know about the book. Well, let me kind of tell about my experience of the book of Acts.
Okay.
How's that? I grew up as a Midwestern Christian church guy. I'm from the Indianapolis area originally.
Sure.
And
Carmel side or Greenwood side?
Yeah, mostly North side.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not. Sorry, I know. I'm on the Union side of Indianapolis, not the Confederate side of Indianapolis.
Gosh.
Okay, I'm not that old.
And we could say more about that, which we will not say.
Yeah. Although someone, I mean, Indiana, I can say this as a recovering Hoosier. Indiana is best characterized as the upraised middle finger of the South. But
thank you for listening to the Bible Bistro.
You can leave that in. You can take that
episode,
out.
That's true. I had never thought of that. But
I mean,
there's truth there.
The Union won the war, but the Confederacy won much of the culture.
Right.
But enough of that. I'm not.
Back to the Bible.
Back to the Bible. Grew up in Indianapolis in the independent Christian churches. Just to name drop a little bit, when I was born, my parents were going to Traders Point Christian Church, which is, of course, a huge multi-site megachurch now.
Right.
But at the time,
the Point now, is that what they call it now?
No,
is it still Traders Point?
Traders Point.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still Traders Point, even though it's all over the north side and downtown and midtown and everything. But at the time, in the early 60s, they were still meeting in the wood frame building there in the section of northwest Marion County that was known as Traders Point. And I remember, well, first of all, my sister was married in that building. She was a lot older than I was. We're all spread out. So I was like 3 years old, and she was married there. I remember vividly the last Sunday in that frame building, and the first Sunday in the next building that they built, which of course now people would think of as the old building. back in the day. And my earliest memory of church is my dad lifting me to hold on to the big rope that the bell was tied to, and he'd use me as kind of a counterweight to ring the bell. So those are my Christian church bona fides right there. And so, I grew up with the idea. After Traders Point, my family was involved in planting a church in Carmel, which now is known as Venture Christian Church. But, I grew up with the idea that the book of Acts was there to kind of show us how to do church.
Right.
It's a kind of a narrative compendium of the model of what a church is. And, of course, this is rooted in the history of the Stone Campbell movement, in the kind of optimism that existed in the 19th century about the United States Constitution, and the belief that a restoration of the understanding of the New Testament as the church's constitution could overcome all of the accretions of history and the divisions that existed among Christians, etc. But I'm struck by the way that Douglas Stewart and Gordon Fee talk about the book of Acts in their celebrated book, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, where they say, all Protestants have a restoration movement mentality where the book of Acts is concerned. Because, as a Christian church person, I would say, we insisted our practice of baptism and understanding of it is grounded in the book of Acts.
Right.
I remember growing up thinking, okay, we shouldn't have missionary societies. We should directly support our missionaries. Why? Because that's how they did it in the book of Acts. Right. We don't sell things in church because they didn't sell things in the book of Acts.
Okay, now we're getting into the absences, right?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, and then, of course, my Church of Christ friends and say, and that's why we don't use instrumental music, but we do, et cetera. So you begin to run into that. But, you go into other circles. Groups that practice confirmation find justification for that in the laying on of hands among the Samaritans in Acts chapter 8.
Really?
As an example. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, there are different parts of the text of Acts that are cited by people who do Episcopal, Presbyterial, and congregational government.
Here it is, clearly in Scripture.
Yeah. It's here, and you kind of cherry pick those kinds of things. Well, so, I went to Bible college, I went to seminary, and this orientation to the book of Acts is always there. So when I go off to Aberdeen for graduate study, because Howard Marshall was there, who was just a wonderful man and a mensch and so forth, and had so much influence on so many of us.
And a Luke Acts scholar.
And, well, that was it. He was a Luke Acts scholar. So it's like, okay, I already like this stuff. And, this is Howard's jam, so I want to get in on that. Yeah. And so I really gravitated to that as a part of my study. But as I'm doing this, and this is something that was gradually dawning on me, I'm realizing that if Acts is written as a kind of narrative compendium of how to do church, it doesn't really succeed. For various reasons, one of which is there are different things going on in different parts of the text. Yeah. And even the thing that my Campbellite brethren had insisted on most, there is a consistent pattern of conversion. It was consistent except for the inconsistencies. About which we had to puzzle and questions that the text does not attempt to answer. Sure. If you there is no indication are the apostles baptized in the name of Jesus on the day of Pentecost along with everybody else. And I'm realizing, okay, you can answer that question either way, or you can just say the text doesn't address it.
Us, yeah.
And if the text doesn't address it, that might suggest that you've gone along a cul-de-sac in terms of your understanding of the of the meaning of this. And then you recognize, okay, if this is a compendium of conversion narratives, and this is something that J.W. McGarvey, whose work I deeply respect, but I find fault with it on this point. This is something that he said. It's a compendium of conversion experiences to show us what conversion is really supposed to be. The last quarter of the book is Paul in prison, and there are no conversion narratives to speak of. In Malta, yes, but nothing.
Well, he
that's
almost persuaded.
Well, that's it. That's it. I mean, there are other things that are just being said over and over and over and over again.
Right.
And you think, maybe, and that is not to say that there isn't a steady notion of conversion in the New Testament. I think there is. I just don't think that Acts is written to give it to us as such, as the leading thing. And so, this just sort of leads me to try to understand better. And it was all there. It wasn't as if this is something new or original or something of that nature. But it really led me to ask, well, what is this book really trying to do? And I got nudges in various directions, and really a couple of things I think were very significant in terms of kind of coming to terms with the book of Acts differently. One is to understand that it is written deliberately as the sequel volume or the second volume of which Luke is the first volume.
Right.
And so this is a continuous narrative. This is Godfather Part 2 to Godfather Part 1. Right. Okay. This is Better Call Saul to Breaking Bad. However you want to go there.
Kind of.
I know they're out of sequence then. Yeah, really, the prequel, etc. I know.
Join us for TV talk.
That's exactly. And so to understand that, and then to see the way that the books are deliberately linked together. The most obvious way that this is the case is that Luke and Acts both begin with this authorial prologue. Right. The first 4 verses of Luke, which name Theophilus, and where Luke says in the Gospel of Luke, I investigated everything from the beginning, and those who are eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, so that you may know the certainty of the things that were taught to you.
Okay.
So certainty, to have confidence, to know that this is not a made-up belief, but it is grounded in public truth because there are witnesses of these things.
Right.
And so to understand the Gospel of Luke in that way, and then we've got to see the book of Acts as a continuation of that.
Right.
Especially when we look at the very short prologue in the book of Acts. In my first book, O Theophilus, I wrote to you about all that Jesus, drum roll, began cymbal crash to do and teach. Okay. Now, in a lot of expositions of Acts, you'd see people commenting on that verse and saying, "Oh, began is kind of a throwaway word. This is just a literary convention. It doesn't really mean began." Okay, and you can make a case for that kind of redundancy or prolixity. It happens in biblical speech like it happens in all speech. But when you look at Acts more closely, you realize, oh, now wait a minute.
Okay.
Oh, now wait a minute. It is fair to say in the book of Acts that as we look at the book as a whole, that it is, in one way of describing it is that it is the story of how Jesus remains active and present, though absent.
Okay.
From what is it?
Physically absent.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So, what's the first thing that happens in the book? Jesus speaks to his apostles, and then he ascends to heaven.
Yeah.
So he's absent. Okay. But what happens through the rest of the story? He's present in the way that his followers are recapitulating what he has done.
Okay.
They are in obedience to him. But they are also living a life that reminds you of his life,
healing the lame.
Yes, exactly. People write about this as the Peter, Stephen, Philip, Paul parallels. Okay. In the book of Acts, where Jesus does miracles of healing, these guys do miracles of healing
in the name of Jesus.
In the name of Jesus, and of course this is important. The first instance of this is in the temple in Acts chapter 3. Peter says, "Silver and gold have I none, but such as I have I give you. In the name of Jesus of Nazareth, stand up and walk."
Right.
So Jesus heals a lame man on the authority of Jesus. Jesus in the Gospel of Luke says, so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority to forgive sins.
Right.
You get up and walk.
Right.
Yeah, and he does. Okay, so that connection is right there. So who is healing this man? Is Peter healing this man? No. Jesus is healing this man. Jesus is healing this man. Let's talk about Stephen parallels. Stephen is, we see Acts predicating miracles with Stephen the same way they do with Peter. But then where is Stephen? He's in the Sanhedrin in chapter 7. And they're the ones who are accusing him. He's on trial for his life. Yeah. Now, what is he?
Accused of blasphemy even.
Right. Yeah, he is. Yeah. Very, very similar. And where is the only place in the New Testament where someone other than Jesus calls Jesus the Son of Man?
There,
it's right there.
I saw the Son of Man standing at the right hand of the throne.
Right, standing at the right hand of God. And what is he doing? He is recapitulating what Jesus said himself before the Sanhedrin.
Right.
Okay. And so they kill him.
Right.
Okay. We go to chapter 12. James is killed. By who? Herod. It's a different Herod. But Luke is the only gospel who tells us about the engagement of Herod in the passion narrative of Jesus.
Okay.
That brief pass off with etc. And we go to the life of Paul. Similar kinds of things with the miracles, the persecution, etc. Paul has a fateful journey to Jerusalem, as Jesus has a fateful journey to Jerusalem. The Gospel of Luke marks even more definitely than the other synoptic gospels Jesus' determination to go to Jerusalem, in that the confession of Peter is very early in the Gospel of Luke. It's in chapter 9, proportionately much earlier than it is in Matthew or Mark. And it is immediately following Peter saying, "You are God's true king," that Jesus says, "I'm going to Jerusalem and I'm going to die." Right. So that comes very early on, and then you get this famous statement in Acts 9:51. From that point, Jesus set his face steadfastly to go to Jerusalem. Right. So Luke is very much putting that journey to Jerusalem in the foreground. When we come to Acts chapter 20, Paul is hurrying to get to Jerusalem because he wants to get there in time for Passover, and he's taking back. Of course, he's got lots of reasons that he's doing this. But as he's speaking to the Ephesian elders, he says, "Now I'm going to Jerusalem, and I don't know what's going to happen. Except everywhere I go, the Spirit is telling me that bad things are waiting for me." Right. We get to the next chapter, and he's in Caesarea, I think, and the Christian and Agabus, who is a prophet in the early church, appears twice. He always has bad news. Agabus never gets invited to parties because
he's Debbie Downer.
He is.
He's a good prophet.
He's a good prophet. Prophets never go to parties. They're Friday night. They're always alone. Right. In Acts chapter 11, he says there's going to be a famine, and in what is it, chapter
16
or 20, 21?
Oh, is it that late?
Yeah,
okay.
It's he takes Paul's belt, and he ties himself up with Paul's belt, and he says the owner of this belt is going to be tied up like this in Jerusalem. Yeah. Everybody says, "Paul, don't go." Right. And Paul says, "No, I got to go.
Right.
I've got to go. This is what God has for me." So they both go to Jerusalem. The temple figures very prominently in their disastrous situation. And lo and behold, Paul is in front of the Sanhedrin the way Jesus was, and he's engaged with the Romans the way Jesus was. Right. Now, the story is not directly parallel because God says to him, "As you have been my witness in Jerusalem, so you will be in Rome." And the story takes us there. But we see all of these kinds of parallels working themselves out. And so as we think about this, I think item one is we're being told God is doing the same thing among the followers of Jesus that he was doing in Jesus, and he's doing it in the same way. Yeah. Now, when we think about this in light of the idea of certainty, what is it that's being said about that in the prologue of Luke? And of course, certainty is always a relative term. Sure. That's bring in a philosopher of religion sometime to talk about that.
We're not going to do that.
I don't know. Eventually, you're going to need something. Okay. Eventually, you need some fresh blood in this thing, guys.
All right. Well, you are fourth time we've had you here.
I know, it's getting pretty stale at this point. But if we're thinking about certainty, I think we ask ourselves, what are the kinds of things that are making you uncertain or making you question the Christian movement? Well, here, I find it interesting to listen to what other voices in the book of Acts are saying about the Christian movement.
Right. Huh. Interesting.
And which I think is kind of Luke's way of acknowledging the other story that exists as he's telling this narrative. Well, these people, they're disobedient to Jewish authority.
Right.
They are blaspheming the temple. They are insurrectionists. Everywhere they go, they create trouble.
Right,
and after all,
right.
they worship a crucified guy.
Right.
Which means they worship someone whom the Romans regarded as an insurrectionist.
Right.
And insurrection language kind of runs through the whole of the Luke and Passion narrative, and comes up again in Acts. They're insurrectionists, they're criminals. Wherever Paul goes, there's probably, this is the man in Ephesus, this is the man who's turned the world upside down all over the place. And there's a huge civic unrest, and all of this. And so the question comes, Paul, this is the narrative of what Paul describes in 2 Corinthians 11. What has he been through? Well, he's received stonings. People have tried to kill him.
Right.
He has been, this isn't narrated in Acts, but in 2 Corinthians, he says he has received the 40 lashes -1, which means he's being disciplined in the synagogue and won't leave it. Because if you are receiving the 40 -1, the synagogue has said you will either no longer live as a Jew in this community, or we will flog you.
Right.
And he said, okay, flog me, because I'm going to continue to live as a Jew in this community. Okay. So this is the atmosphere that's going on. So in all of this looks like some weird and potentially dangerous religious sect, which is based on some unbelievable story, and which is damaging to the civic good, as it were. So on the one hand, Acts is showing us that all of the problems that are associated with Christianity really have their roots not in the Christians, but in their opponents.
Right.
In their opponents' attempt to hold on to power, in their jealousy for the influence that the Christians have, etc. When it comes down to the most extended trial narrative that we have, the Romans don't know what to do with Paul. He goes to Rome without any clear charges. Right. They hold a hearing to try to sort all of this out, and it's like, well, we still don't know what to charge you with, but you got to go to Rome because you've appealed to Rome. Right. So all of this is really saying, okay, this movement is not the dangerous, ill-founded, subversive thing that it appears to be. Well, why is it in the condition that it's in? Why is it like this? And the fundamental answer then is that the true message of God, the true work of God, is something that is widely opposed by the world at large, because it so fundamentally challenges and opposes everything that the world at large holds dear. Power, wealth, the unique status that people have as members of a people group. There's a lot of talk these days.
Group,
there's a lot of talk these days about ethnic identity and whether that should or play any role in the Christian life. Acts is a profoundly ethnically aware narrative. In fact, in some cases, it seems to be deliberately poking fun at the stereotypes of ethnic identity, which we could talk about, but it's a bit of a distraction. But you just read through the book of Acts sometime, just looking for all the ways that people are identified ethnically. It's all over the place. You carry this stuff with you. So all of those things are being challenged. And in particular, the nexus between Jewish identity and the rest of the world, the nations or the Gentiles, is being challenged, because this larger message is the God of Israel is now doing what he's always promised to do. He's taking his world back. The promise to Abraham is being fulfilled. The promise of the true prophet like Moses is being fulfilled. The promise of the great son of David, whose throne God will establish forever, is being fulfilled. The promise to the exiles of post-exilic restoration is being fulfilled. All of it in this community of God's people, identified by their belief in Jesus and by their being filled with God's promised Holy Spirit through the instrumentality of Jesus, to live prophetic lives, small p prophetic, not meaning they're predicting things, but they are declaring God's message by what they say and what they do, all of which is determined by, modeled on the way that Jesus himself lives as the greatest of the prophets.
Right. I'm struck by what he says, what Jesus himself says. I mean, just to kind of, add further this, where he says that these are the same kind of things you're going to be doing.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. If they hate me, they're going to hate you. Right. This is,
the things that I've done, you'll do greater things.
Yes, that's John, but we'll take it because it all fits together. It all fits together so beautifully.
Yeah. I mean,
I count on you to bring John into the discussion.
I can't believe you went to John, Brian.
That's it. We all got our thing.
Yeah, but no, you're right. But it's that idea that, and even I guess what I'm saying, in all of the Gospels, it seems like there's this idea. If you want me to go synoptic on you, then
sure, that's fine.
He's going full synoptic.
Then you've got the 12, the calling of the 12, and they're sent out to do the things that Jesus is doing. You've got the 72, and they're out, casting out demons and all that kind of stuff.
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Yeah.
I've actually read the other three Gospels.
We are right there. So, part of what's going on in the Gospel of Luke is, how in the world can this guy be the Messiah?
Right.
I mean, after all, he got killed.
Right.
Okay, and the whole story is showing us what's going on there. He has the authority that can only belong to God.
Right.
Yet he willingly surrenders to his enemies.
Sure.
And in that way, he dies for us and he suffers with us. He is like the prophets who've come before. There's half a dozen or so notions that get all tied into the meaning of the cross there, which is another episode, I suppose. But then, his followers are living life in the same way, maybe not to the same magnitude, but all of what they do is cruciform. So, one of the kind of summaries of this is that if Acts is about a pattern for the church, the pattern is the cross.
Right.
That this is the way that the church lives. It's always in our seeming weakness, lowliness, alienation, poverty, lack of influence, that the true power of the Spirit is to be found.
Yeah, I'm struck by that. Just at Pentecost. I mean, that's what cuts them to the heart. This Jesus whom you crucified.
Yes.
God has made both Lord and Christ.
Yeah.
That even though you crucified him, he's still Messiah. He's still Christ.
He is.
Right?
Yeah. God has vindicated him. God has empowered him. Why do we have the Spirit and you don't? Because we're the followers of Jesus and you're not. Guess who the King is?
Yeah. This is the demonstration of what was prophesied in Joel.
And how King is he? Well, who gets to pour out God's Spirit?
Right.
God.
Yeah.
Okay, so you are now God's enemies, and that's why you need to repent.
Yeah. And that's their response.
Yeah. Whoa, we're God's enemies, which is exactly what John the Baptist has been telling them, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So the powers of the world are aligned around things like wealth and power,
political power,
military power, et cetera. And I'm going to access one of my favorite books on Acts. It's really on Luke Acts, is Prophetic Jesus, Prophetic Church by Luke Timothy Johnson. Terrifically readable book, and I think really, really challenging as well. He, among other things, he describes the life of Jesus and the church as described by poverty, itinerancy, prayer, and servant leadership.
Well, repeat those again slowly.
Yeah. Poverty. Okay. First of all, okay. And I hate
as opposed to wealth.
As opposed to wealth, yeah. In other words, you are utterly dependent on God. Right. In God's reign, God is lifting up his lowly people. Yeah. And so we deliberately seek a position of lowliness.
So in Luke, when you go out, don't take a bag with you.
Right.
Don't take your purse.
God will take care of you. Yeah. Silver and gold, I don't have any. I'll give you what I have. But in the midst of that, God is providing for his people all the time. Okay. Whether they have, Paul's commentary on this in Philippians. I know the secret of contentment, whether I'm in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength.
Right.
That's what that is about.
Okay. So poverty. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's okay. No, that's good. Poverty is right there, and right now we're getting uncomfortable, and that's right where we should be. Right. Okay. Because I don't care how much or how little you have. Right. This should make you uncomfortable, and it casts us back on the provision and the mercy of God. Right. Itineracy, you don't stay in one place.
Right.
Now, what does that look like? It looks different under every circumstance, but it means that I am a citizen of the world in one respect. That I go where God takes me, but I belong everywhere.
Right.
Because God is now taking his world back. He is establishing his reign over the world. He is making the whole world his temple.
Maybe I'm not deriving my sense of purpose and self by my location.
Right. And I may live and die within 20 miles of my birthplace.
Right, but it's not. I'm not going to take that as where I place my trust.
Right. Yeah. And this is more than saying this world is not my home.
Right.
This is saying the whole world
is my home.
My home.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a very different thing. We're not escaping the world. God is taking the world back, and he's somehow doing that through us.
Right.
Yeah, in the name of Jesus and through the power of the Spirit at work in us. The third is prayer.
Okay.
Not merely prayer as a practice, but prayer as a posture of complete dependence on God. Okay. Dependence for provision, dependence for guidance, dependence for deliverance.
Right.
One of the very peculiar things in the book of Acts is this thing at the beginning of what we call Paul's second missionary journey, where he and Silas are passing through the regions of Asia Minor where they've been before, and then they go into a new area, and we read the Spirit prevented them from preaching in these areas. And you think, what is going on? The Spirit's supposed to empower you to preach.
Right.
And of course, we have no idea how that comes to them. And the text has, there's nothing, by the way, there is nothing in the book of Acts that gives you a technique for getting more Holy Spirit.
Oh. What?
Oh.
I'm sorry. Okay. There is nothing that says if you will do this, you will have miraculous power like Peter, Stephen, Philip, and Paul.
Right.
There is, you don't get to call the shots the way you want them called.
Right.
Okay. Well, by whatever means, they're prevented from preaching, and then Paul comes to Troas, and he has a dream, come over to Macedonia and help us. It's all just a matter of, get across the Aegean to Macedonia. In the larger narrative of the thing, in the larger New Testament, it's kind of fun to read 1 Peter and see all of those regions that Paul wasn't allowed to preach in, they're all evangelized.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the very place to which 1 Peter is written.
Right.
At any rate, this is how you're living by the Spirit's guidance. Yeah. What happens in the early chapters of Acts, the church is kind of like occupying the temple, as it were, The temple is the Lord's space, and the Lord is Jesus. So the church is there teaching and preaching, and the temple hierarchy, who are their bitter enemies, same as they were the bitter enemies of Jesus, are there trying to arrest them and kick them out, and so forth and so on. And finally, they succeed. They kill Stephen, and they get a general persecution going on, and everybody flees. But what that doesn't mean the end of Jesus as Lord of the temple. That means we just expand the temple.
Right. Samaria.
We go to Samaria. The Ethiopian is included, and the Ethiopian's identity is so important because he comes from the place which, in the social geography of the ancient Near East, is about the farthest away place you can imagine. When you look in the Old Testament for Cush, which is the same region, it's always in these texts about the farthest away place you can imagine. Right. The way in the West we talk about Timbuktu or digging a tunnel to China or something of that nature. And all of these things are socially located. So this is a guy from the ends of the earth, as it were.
Okay.
And of course, as a eunuch, he figures in Isaiah's saying the temple of fulfillment is not going to exclude people the way the current temple does.
Sure.
If you aren't bodily whole, you can't be a part of the temple because the worshiper is supposed to be like the sacrifice in the temple, but God isn't finished. This is where he's going. And so the Ethiopian's inclusion is, the temple's on the road now. Okay. And of course, if we wanted to go to the Gospel of John,
which we never want to do that.
Explain what you mean when you say the temple's on the road. Like, what do you mean by the word temple here? For those who haven't been with this before.
Yeah, if we think about this as temple, not merely as a building or a place, but as the place where it is safe for humans to be in touch with God. Okay. One of the distinctive things about Israel's temple is that Canaanite temples were built to protect the god from the outside world. And Israel's tabernacle and temple are built to make it safe for people to approach God. It's a different thing.
Right.
We're not protecting the God in a fortress. We're creating a means by which we can approach God.
We recognize the serious business it is to come into the presence of the holy God.
Yeah, exactly. And when you read Exodus, that's all tied up there.
If I can bring in a couple things that are not Acts, I mean, you mentioned 1 Corinthians already, so I feel okay to say this, but the temple there is mentioned as all y'all are the temple of God.
That's it, because the Spirit lives in all of you. And so this is true individually and collectively.
And then Peter, you have, you are all being built together as living stones into a house that is the Spirit, this
holy
is
priesthood.
Ephesians, same thing. Jews and Gentiles are the building blocks of the temple.
Right.
Gospel of John. The Samaritan woman. Hey, which one's the true temple? Oh, the time is coming, and now is. Yeah, we're taking the show on the road.
Right.
Now, as I'm reading the Old Testament, I read that when the temple of fulfillment comes, the Gentiles will stream to it.
Right.
On this
highway of the Lord.
On this mountain, Isaiah 26, God says, I will have a feast for all nations.
Right.
One of my favorites of the Old Testament. Well, what happens
25,
here? Okay. Thank you. Yes.
But who's counting,
I just
right?
happened to preach from it yesterday.
Well, amen. We need that. As a wise man has said, chapter numbers in the Bible are like horseshoes and hand grenades. If you get close, it's good enough.
Good enough.
You'll
Sorry,
find it.
You get the idea. You get the idea, Isaiah.
Yeah, it's there. It's somewhere.
Testament.
Keep looking around. You'll find some other good stuff, too.
It's somewhere. It's there in the Bible. You just look for it. God helps those who help themselves.
Yeah. That's the Bible said.
But on this mountain, a feast for all nations. Okay.
Right.
Well, what happens with this? Okay, the feast goes to the nations.
Right.
Okay. Some people use the word centripetal to describe the imagery of the Old Testament, everything in towards the center.
Sure.
And Acts is centrifugal.
Yeah.
It goes outward. And so this is
gathering and scattering.
This is an aspect of the itinerancy. We sit lightly to place because we are now citizens of the world that God is taking back. We carry our identity and our background with us.
Sure.
One of the amazing things, and this is important for multiple reasons, is that in the last quarter of the book of Acts, Paul says he's a Jew multiple times, over and over and over again. Paul never actually says he's a Christian. He is, but he never says that. He doesn't have to. He says, I am a Jew.
Right.
And a big part of the argument there is if you want to be faithful to your identity as a Jew, you've got to understand that Jesus is God's true King.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And you're not being faithful to God if you do otherwise. So, all of this kind of thing is going on with itinerancy. Prayer is this posture of dependency on God in the midst of this. How are we going to survive in a world where people hate us and we're downtrodden and poor and weak and everything else? God is going to provide for his people in this way. And then servant leadership, that the power of the gospel is to be seen not in the way that we are accustomed to power being exercised. It's to be seen in lowliness that serves others in love. So the greatest among you is going to be the servant. While Jesus is telling his disciples in the upper room he's going to die, they're arguing over who is going to be the greatest.
Right.
And he calls them knuckleheads.
And takes the form of a servant. Again, to allude to John.
But
who's...
Now, where do you see the servant leadership in can you give me an example of that in Acts then?
Sure. We see that in the way that they're just schlepping around.
Okay.
That the leaders of the church are just these ordinary dudes.
Okay.
That they are challenging the powers that be, not by trying to become the powers that be. But by their declaration of who Jesus is, and then just accepting what comes. So these are poor, ordinary people. Paul makes tents. They're just on the road at this level of simplicity. We have heroes in the story like this elderly woman named Dorcas.
Good. That's a good example.
Who spends her life making things for other poor people.
Right, and they bring it and they say, "Look at all
she
these
made
things
this for me."
Yeah.
This
that's
is
good.
This is the triumph of the thing.
Good example.
You see it in the way that they are sharing generously with one another. There's always controversy about Acts and economics and people wanting to argue capitalism and communism as if you can impose those kinds of things on a pre-modern economy, for heaven's sake. But you see different ways that this is manifested. In the church in Jerusalem, people are selling their stuff so that it can be freely shared with the poor. Acts makes very clear that they're doing this freely. Part of the narrative of Ananias and Sapphira is to make clear this is all happening voluntarily.
Yeah.
But you see a different manifestation of this when we come to the story of the Antioch church in Acts chapter 11 with our favorite Debbie Downer, Agabus. Who, Agabus says, there's a famine.
Right.
And it's coming, and it's going to affect everybody. And understand, a famine doesn't simply mean it's hard to get flour or eggs go up to $5 a dozen or something like that. When you're living in an ancient subsistence economy, you're probably spending about 60% of your income on food. So if the price goes up very much, you will slowly starve.
Yeah.
So
it's food is inaccessible.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And you don't just buy something instead of eggs,
right? Or you don't get to buy your favorite brand; you have to do the store brand.
Exactly. Ask your neighbors for toilet paper. But what does the church at Antioch do? It takes a collection and sends it to people they don't even know in Jerusalem.
Right.
And who are ethnically, many of them, different from them. This is a mixed ethnicity church, Jews and Gentiles. They're Jews and Gentiles. And they're saying, let's help out the people in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Why? Because they're our brothers and sisters.
Right.
Okay. So that's the servant leadership.
Okay.
In all of this. Nobody is claiming privilege. Nobody is pulling rank. You follow Jesus by serving one another in love.
Right.
Yeah.
And then was there another category then after that? Or?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. Poverty, itinerancy, prayer, servant leadership.
Okay. Thanks for unpacking those for me.
That helped. Some other categories that we can think about. The Gospel of Luke shows Jesus as deliberately focused on the outcast, the poor, on women,
the outsiders,
on children. People who read these books, not just critically in a broad sense, but critically in a negative sense, say, Acts becomes so bourgeois because no longer is there this focus on the poor, etc. But the inclusion of Gentiles is critical here because there's a very important kind of mixed nexus of power in the world of these narratives. If you are a Jew in the Greco-Roman world, you are largely an outsider. Of course, there's another story to be told about the way that Jewish people found various ways to accommodate the larger Hellenistic culture, and some went all the way and some went not so far, and others separated themselves, etc. But if you are Jewish, you are a cultural outsider. Your faith and your ethnic identity demand a kind of nonconformity to the culture at large that puts you on the outside. So you are without power. But in the context of your religious faith, you hold all the cards, because you belong to the people of God, and the Gentiles are, as Gentiles, excluded. You may welcome them to acknowledge the God of Israel, but unless they renounce their old tribe and join yours, they are on the outside. Okay, so if you are a Jewish believer in Jesus and you're including Gentiles, you just surrendered all your power.
Okay.
Right there. Okay. And so what Luke is showing us with Jesus seeking the lowly and focusing on the poor, on the women, on children in the Gospel of Luke is largely, but not entirely, transposed to the inclusion of Gentiles, because they are the number one group of disempowered outsiders in the power structure of the people of God. Ironically enough, and maybe even more potently, what this means for Jewish believers is, as I said, giving up the last place where you've got anything where you signify by your identity.
So Cornelius's household, Cornelius within the Roman hierarchy would have had...
He's a deal.
Yeah, would have a significant position.
Yes.
But Peter, he asked, request for Peter to come to him. To his
that's great. Yes, that's right. That the tables are turned here to the point that Cornelius bows before him in a way that Peter says, "Don't do that." And I don't think that means that Cornelius thought that Peter was divine, but that Peter is emphasizing, now there is no favoritism.
Yeah.
There is no favoritism. And of course this is the message. Now I understand there is no favoritism.
Right.
And what is the thing that Peter gets in trouble for? You ate in a Gentile's house.
Yeah, you went into his house and ate with him.
You ate with him. You risked contamination, and you're treating him like a brother.
Right.
And well, what could I do? God gave him the Spirit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But right there, I just lost the last place where I signified for who I am. So there's a fascinating transformation that's taking place in all of that. Now, if I can tag onto this, when we get to the end of the book and we see Paul saying, "I am a Jew, I am a Jew, I am a Jew," really what he's saying there is we're now very far along in the book, and we're understanding. We shouldn't say, as modern non-Jewish Christians often do, the Jews rejected Jesus, because all of my New Testament heroes, almost without exception, are Jewish.
Sure.
Yeah, including Jesus.
Which Paul says something about in Romans.
He does indeed. Yeah, he does indeed. And he says in Acts, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew.
Right.
The point is to say, no, Judaism and Christianity aren't two different things. Christianity is the true fulfillment of Judaism. It is the true fulfillment of the promises that God has made to Israel to bless the nations, to send his true king, to restore his people after exile, and in so doing, to show to the world by his mighty hand that he is the true God. The irony is that he's doing it in this cruciform way. So when Paul says, I'm a Jew, what he's saying is, and this is how I came to the point where I am now, and why I am being faithful to my Jewish identity, even my Pharisaic identity, because I believe in the resurrection of the dead, and now God has done it.
Right. So Gamaliel, being a student of Gamaliel the Great, like this, but this is the actual fulfillment. Now that gets you in trouble sometimes if you're like me, because there are people who want to continue to say that that's an appropriation of that Old Testament or the Jewish character.
Yeah.
How would you respond to that? Or
I would say it is. Yes, it is an appropriation of Jewish character. It is a very real question.
Yeah.
How do we understand Judaism?
Yeah.
What is it? I mean, it isn't as if these discussions aren't going on. I mean, it isn't as if everyone is agreed on what it means to live as a Jew, right? And obviously, this is a place where we need Jewish voices involved in the discussion. To say this on the negative in maybe a more appropriately servant leadership way, if that is the case, especially after you've drawn attention to it. We're living with 2,000 years of bad Christian behavior. When Christianity became ascendant in the West, it became oppressive of people who continued to dissent from Christianity by maintaining Jewish identity apart from belief in Jesus. And there's a process as non-Jews became dominant in the church, it became harder and harder to maintain an identity as a Jew and to believe in Jesus. And of course, there are things that happen in medieval and early modern Europe that have to do with economics and law and so forth that exacerbate these tensions and so forth. So I understand fully why for modern Jewish people it is difficult to say you can be a Jew and confess Jesus as Messiah. I understand where that comes from. I would simply want to say, let's read these texts and understand in the beginning it was not so. As far as these people were concerned, they were still Jews, and they were compelled to believe this because of what they had seen and heard.
I'd say, in a way, it's even an extension of the Old Testament story. You get someone like Ruth, just as an example, who says, your God will be my God, your people will be my people. It's just an extension of that inclusion and acceptance. That this is there is no, as to quote a Jewish rabbi, there is now no dividing wall of hostility. Right? That's been broken down in Christ.
You if you start with the promise to Abraham, Genesis 12 happens to follow Genesis 11. So the Tower of Babel is the narrative which is summarized in Psalm 2. Why do the nations rage? Why is the world in chaos? It's in rebellion against God. What does God promise to do with that? Genesis 12. By you I will bless all the families of the earth. And so Ruth is a proleptic example of that.
Yeah. And there are others.
There are others.
Pointed that one out.
Yeah. I mean, and of course, Jesus gets into deep trouble pointing some of these out in the synagogue at Nazareth in Luke chapter 4. And when Paul is in the temple in Acts chapter 22, he says, God said to me, go because I'm sending you to the Gentiles. And that's when people start throwing dust and tearing their clothes. And the Roman centurion rescues him from, so forth. So, I mean, is it a cultural appropriation? Judaism is multifaceted in the Second Temple period,
and it is today.
There are, this. I heard someone say this, and I've repeated it countless times. There are two Jewish sects that survived the fall of the temple.
Yeah.
They are the Pharisees, who became the foundation of Rabbinic Judaism, from which all other Judaisms later flow, and the Christians.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a fun trick question to throw at undergraduates. Who are the two Jewish sects who survived the fall of the temple? They always get the Pharisees.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, from a layman's perspective.
Yes.
What does this mean for how we read then? What does it mean for as we read
That's
Acts?
a really good question. As we read Acts, I think we are being challenged to see in our own lives this pattern of cruciformity and to pursue it deliberately. Okay, and let me just use some of these categories: poverty, itinerancy, prayer, servant leadership. How are those characteristic of my life, and to what degree can they become more? And if you're looking for a formula here, you're going to fail. How much do I have to pray?
Right.
That's not the question. Okay.
Right.
This isn't a checklist that we tick off. A life of dependency on God is a life of dependency on God, which is going to be expressed in a prayerful life, irrespectively of how often we stop and pray. Though it'll probably be more often than we would otherwise.
Right.
A life of poverty may be expressed in various ways, but it's always going to challenge the way we think of ourselves and our security. And I got to tell you, as I'm at an age where I'm approaching retirement and thinking about all of that, it is no less true now than it has been at any point of my hand-to-mouth existence.
Just go back to, it's the pattern in Acts. Silver and gold have I none.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what a Christian worker should have. So
it seems to be the case.
In the Christian church.
Sorry. Just to make a joke against everything that we've been taught to this point. Just go back to that idea of prayer, it's dependency upon God. And this is really this is the struggle. It's not the act of praying. I would say it is to be a person who is saying, I'm not going to come up with the answers on my own.
Right.
And again, I'll say it goes all the way back to the garden, really, and that's just
it
that expression.
Absolutely does.
Over and over again. I'm not gonna come up with the answers on my own. I'm going to trust myself to the Creator of the universe to say He's the one who's going to guide me. Lean not on your own understanding, and all your ways acknowledge Him, and He'll make your path straight. It's just, just a part of that.
No, that is absolutely the case. I am a person who, by nature, is wired to try to think through contingencies and come up with plans of action for all of that.
Based on your own abilities, and your own power.
I play chess with life. Okay, if this move, then that move, et cetera, et cetera. But you reach points in your life, and I have recently, where you realize I can't do that.
Yeah.
All I can do is live in the moment and thank God for taking care of me and trust Him to take care of all of these contingencies that even if I imagined them, I couldn't figure out how to respond to.
Right. That's good.
Yeah, and as we choose to live that way, we are expanding the temple.
The kingdom.
We are. And this is where, we might think of, okay, we're not even talking about proclamation because the church in Acts is talking about Jesus all the time. But the talk about Jesus doesn't mean a thing if you aren't leading a Jesus-like life. Sure. And so both in their proclamation and in their life, the church is prophetic. And there's something I think that addresses us now as well. I mean, again, a lot of us are concerned about the loss of influence that Christianity has in Western culture, in America in particular. And we reflect on the mistakes that we have made, right? And we think about correcting those mistakes. The larger reality is we are called to live Christ-like lives and to do that in deed and in word. And we simply have to do that. We have to, and that doesn't prescribe a specific course of action. It may take us in various directions in specific institutions, communities, roles that we might have. But we do that in utter dependency on God. This is who we are called to be. This is where the true power of God is manifested, and God's will is going to prevail in the world.
He's got us right where he wants us. Huh?
As you know, why are you looking up to heaven? He's going to return in the same way that he left.
Right.
You know, so stop looking.
Yeah. I think this has been great. You know, I think those 4 categories, you know, I think sometimes when we read Acts can take a little bit to read. You know, there's a lot happening in there. So when you have those categories that you kind of highlighted, for us to be thinking about those things as we read these books, and to see like, how is this forming them in this story? And then that reflective back, like, how is this forming me? Am I reflecting that? As you said, you know, it's word and deed. And I think having those categories in mind kind of gives you a framework to start digesting some of that all throughout Acts of what's happening there.
You mentioned how big it is. I'll never forget when you said this. It was a graduate level Greek class we had, and you know, the first time I heard you say that 25% of the narrative of the New Testament is the words of the New Testament is Luke, Acts.
That's right.
It seems counterintuitive, but when you start thinking about these are big books with long chapters.
Just grab your Bible and pinch the pages.
Right.
And then see
there's
how
a
much,
lot there.
There is. Yeah. So Paul is a little less than that. John is a little less than that, and that leaves some room for some other guys.
Those other guys. All those other, as I would say, all those other guys and the stuff they wrote. So.
Yeah, that's it. That's pretty much it. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and. Well, I have nothing else to say.
That's good.
But I also appreciate the continuation of the work of Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, I think, at least in me, I'm projecting myself. You know, we think about just the Spirit. You know, it's like it's the Pentecost and we got the Spirit. But just thinking that this is a continuation of the story of Jesus.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Spirit's empowering the continuation of the story of Jesus.
That's exactly right.
But for me, it's always been, it's about the Spirit in Acts, you know, and that's equipping there. But this is about the Spirit equipping the continuation of the narrative of Jesus.
Yeah, it is the Spirit. It is about the Spirit.
Yes.
It's about the Spirit that Jesus pours out because Jesus is King.
You're right.
Right.
Yeah. And so it is the Spirit of Jesus.
And that's always a big, you know, Jesus is King.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about that in a recent when this comes out, several episodes back about, but that Jesus is King. Like we've got to reclaim some of that, like that kingship piece of it, not just that Jesus died for my sins, but he is King now.
Yeah, exactly.
This is all good stuff. I just want to. It occurred to me on the way, and I just want to ask about this one thing. I don't know if this is going to be relevant or not, but you mentioned Pentecost just then, and how because a lot of times we really point to that in Acts. Pentecost is such an important text. What is your thought about that? Is it that central, or how do you?
It is. Yeah, it is. It's programmatic, if you will. Okay. First of all, it's important. It's interesting that Pentecost has become known in the Second Temple period as the celebration of the giving of the law at Mount Sinai.
Right.
So there's a bit
by this time it wasn't. If you're not going to find that in the Old Testament,
correct?
That's what John's saying. But by this period of time, that's one of the things that's celebrated at this.
Just
time.
like you're not going to find Hanukkah in the Old Testament. That's right.
You got to look at Maccabees.
That's right.
Yeah.
So this is the tradition that has grown up, but. And it's worth mentioning, all the people who are in that narrative are Jewish, but they have come to Jerusalem, probably not just for Pentecost, but I think given some things in the language, to live in Jerusalem. But then as we think about, of course, what we typically think about, and by the way, one of the things that we've been doing this whole time, deliberately on my part, maybe unconsciously on yours, we are not talking about controversy over Pentecostal charismatic phenomena.
Sure.
I am not interested in talking about that controversy. Okay,
Right.
We'll have you on another time to know
to express my indifference. Okay, about all of that. Okay. I actually have opinions on it, but they aren't related to.
For the purposes of this podcast, you don't. Episode.
Well, and my opinions may surprise you. Okay, that's a way of getting on again because that's a tease.
Oh, geez.
But as we think about Pentecost, not in terms of that controversy, should we or shouldn't we? Is this incidental? Is it necessary? Think about this story in terms of how it would resonate against prior biblical stories. Okay. What does it mean for a bunch of people to be speaking a bunch of different languages?
Right.
And it's an echo of
Babel.
The time. Yeah, exactly.
Reversal of Babel.
Yeah, it is a reversal of that. Okay, there we have many languages which come as a result of people's rebellion against God and lead to confusion and hostility. Again, I think Psalm 2 is the poetic version of Genesis 11 on this point. Okay, so what happens here? It is by God's Spirit that these people speak many languages, and God is praised, and everyone understands. And they come together.
Bringing together.
And then you look at the way that Luke describes this. It's like he's got Jerusalem. It's like he's looking at a map that has Jerusalem in the center, and he goes east and northeast, and he just goes all around, including. So it's like all points of the compass. We're all here.
When he's talking about naming all the nations that these people are understanding.
all of the places where these people have been. Okay, and then this will be for you and your children and for all who are far off. And Peter is speaking better than he understands. Because
at least better than he practices.
Because he needs a 2x4 against the head in chapter 10.
Right.
Okay. Yes. I'm not going to eat that stuff.
Right.
And so forth. So what we're seeing there is the announcement. Okay, this is the fulfillment of God's promise to bless the nations.
Right.
This is Genesis 12 answering Genesis 11.
Okay.
This is the reversal of Babel. It's not a perfect reversal. It's more like turning a sock inside out.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, and then it's leading toward, I would say, Revelation, where you've got people from every tribe, tongue, language, and they're all joining
together
in this chorus together.
And they are not there because their identities have been obliterated or that they have been assimilated. They are there in their diversity, but in a unity that transcends that.
The passage that I love out of Revelation, I think, points to that, is where it says the wealth of the nations we brought into that. Yeah. There's a way, and you have to be careful. You get into the medieval doctrine of the blessed fall if you're not too careful. But there's a way in which all of this beautiful diversity that has been brought about as a result of our sin, God in His providence and in His power has made into something even more beautiful than we can imagine.
And I think the upshot of Babel is not that we would all be the same kind of people if we weren't sinners. It's that it's our willful sinfulness that makes us hate each other.
Right, that's true.
In our difference, because I'm not even totally comfortable with you two white guys.
That's fine. It's mutual.
You're from the wrong side of Indianapolis.
That's fair.
That's right. Southsider.
And Brian,
both of you are from northern Indiana.
Brian, you're basically from Kentucky.
Anything north of Columbus is northern Indiana to me.
Oh gosh. Well, on those wonderful notes of unity and everything. Yes. We're going to wrap up this episode.
Thanks again, John.
Thank you so much.
Oh, it's just a blast.
Good stuff.
It's been great stuff.
And come back to Jon Weatherly anytime.
It's been a great place to host and
centrally located.
Incredible thoughts. Yeah, very centrally located,
more or less.
And
so we don't. It's not Bistro.
Very delicious chocolate chip cookies.
It's not Bistro East or Bistro West. This is Bistro Central. Now, so.
Shambana Bistro.
Shambana Bistro. All right. Well, we'll be back next Tuesday.
All right.
Thanks. See you.